Radio, timeless Christianity, 24 hours a day.
Search the Scriptures as Christ our God said in the Gospel.
This is Search the Scriptures Live with Dr. Jeannie Constantinou. Join us for an interactive verse-by-verse study of the Bible with one of Orthodoxy's most respected biblical scholars. Study along with us and share your comments and questions by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Dr. Jeannie Constantinou.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Illumine our hearts, O Master who loves mankind, with the pure light of thy divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our minds to understand thy gospel teachings. Implant in us also the fear of thy blessed commandments, that trampling down all carnal desires, we may enter upon a spiritual manner of living, both thinking and doing such things that are well-pleasing to thee. For thou art the illumination of our souls and bodies, O Christ our God, and to thee we ascribe glory, together with thy Father who is from everlasting, and thine good and all holy and life-giving Spirit, now and ever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen. Welcome, dear brothers and sisters, to Search the Scriptures Live. I'm Dr. Jeannie Constantinou. This is Ancient Faith Radio, of course. This is episode number 213 of the live program, Search the Scriptures Live. And today's date is July 10th, 2023. It is actually our 31st lesson on the Gospel of Matthew, and we're still in chapter 7. So we're taking our time, but I hope you're enjoying it because there's so many interesting things to learn about in the Gospel of Matthew. You know, somebody wrote to me a couple days ago and said, did St. John Chrysostom write a commentary on the Gospel of Mark? I said, no, he did not, nor did he on the Gospel of Luke, although we have some very nice sermons by Chrysostom, and he incorporates some things that we only find in the Gospel of Luke. It would have been great to have a series of sermons by Chrysostom on Luke, but we don't. But why not Mark? Because almost all of Mark is, and the stories, you know, the content, the parables of Mark, almost everything that Mark has is in Matthew. So according to the tradition of the church, Matthew wrote first, and then Mark's gospel is a shortened version of that. Now, most scholars don't agree with that, but that really doesn't matter, because they would not see any reason to have a separate study of Mark's gospel when Matthew has everything that Mark has plus a lot more, because Mark is much shorter than Matthew. And Mark is shorter because it's missing all of these wonderful teaching sections that we're going through right now, which is the first one being, of course, the Sermon on the Mount. And today we're going to focus on the Golden Rule, one of the most famous passages in the Bible. But before we get to that, I wanted to go back and briefly return to last week's discussion about not judging other people. And this is because of an email that I received recently. I thought you might find it kind of interesting to discuss. We haven't really spoken about this. This is kind of having to do with some issues that face women, some gender issues, but also there's a beautiful passage by St. Paisios that I would like to read to you. And it's very useful. And it also fits in with some of the things I try to warn you about. Let me mention one other email, which I'm not going to read. Somebody recently, I was corresponding with somebody who, I don't think he's even Orthodox yet, but he's found the Orthodox Church and he loves it. And he's had some spiritual experiences. And I told him to be careful, because spiritual experiences, even things that seem positive and good, can be tricks of the devil. And this is not something that I think any other church talks about. Only the Orthodox talk about this, that there is a very high possibility of delusion, spiritual delusion, even when somebody, it seems to be good. So this guy was asking for some guidance on this, and somebody told him, well, if it leads you toward Christ, it's good. And I said, but you can't always tell where it's leading you, because the evil one is very crafty. He's very cunning. He's not going to entice you away with something that's obviously a temptation. He's going to entice you away with something that seems to be good or might give you false spiritual experiences. And if you're not aware of that, then you could really make some very serious mistakes. So it's along those lines that St. Paisios is talking about this, but in this case, having to do with judging others. And it was so interesting. I wanted to share that with you. Now, here's another question that I received as an email. I'll leave out the name and place since I haven't heard back from him. I asked for permission, but I didn't hear back in time. Hi, Dr. Jeannie. My question relates to an argument that I've seen frequently from progressive, so-called progressive Christians on social media. They say that the Bible doesn't support the admonition for Christian women not to dress in a way that exposes lots of skin. They say that the Lord never told women to cover up. Instead, he told men to pluck their eyes out if they struggle with lust. They also say that St. Paul's teachings about modesty apply to excessive displays of wealth, not skin. Okay. Well, what can I say about this? So he wants to know whether or not these arguments are incorrect and what the fathers have to say about it. Well, that's absolutely ridiculous. First of all, it is true that Jesus never told, first of all, most of what Jesus said is not written in the Bible. Okay. That most of what he said was not recorded. What we have in the Gospels is a tiny fraction of everything he said, or did, just a small fraction of it. Now, of what we have, does Jesus ever tell women cover up? No, he doesn't. Why? Because women were covered. Okay. He didn't need to tell them to do this. So it's our culture today that has this problem. So what about that admonition about lust? Okay, if you're right eye, because that is in the Gospel of Matthew, and we did discuss it recently. If your right eye offends you, pluck it out. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. Well, here, of course, he's talking to the person who is experiencing the temptation. Now, does this mean, let's assume it's a man who's tempted by a beautiful woman. Does this mean that the woman bears no responsibility at all? Of course not. That's a ridiculous argument. And it fits in very well with what we are talking about today, which is the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So we're supposed to behave as Christians in a way that is loving. And that means that we do not entice other people to sin, regardless of what that sin is. So these kinds of arguments, these stupid arguments on the internet, are designed so that they're justifications for bad behavior. And this happens when we don't pay any attention to what the teachings of the church is, or even common sense, and instead people are looking for some legalistic excuse for what they're doing. Okay, so anyone who says, well, Jesus didn't tell women to cover up, therefore it doesn't matter how they dress, is I'm sorry, that's moronic. Okay, it's absolutely moronic. It's not true, and it doesn't make sense. All right. So it's just because Jesus didn't address something very specific like that doesn't mean that women, so-called Christian women, can dress in any way they want, because the fact is that women can tempt men to sin by inducing thoughts in their minds. And I'm sure we could say the same thing for the way men dress in terms of women, but usually it's women who are more scantily clad. And let's be perfectly honest about this. Women know how to dress so as to be attractive to men, or to at least attract male attention, sometimes not of the good kind. All right. So let's not play around here. The purpose for women's dress very often is exactly that. And girls know this. And then even girls fall into this trap where they say, well, I just think I look cute. they're wearing something, perhaps, especially younger girls, teenage girls, sometimes they're not, they just think it looks good, or very short skirt or low cut dress or something like this. Those of us who grew up female kind of know that we don't recognize fully the kind, even though we think we're just looking attractive, we don't realize how men perceive this. And men tend to be much more visual. And men also draw conclusions about women based on how they dress. And frankly, the whole point of so many admonitions in the New Testament about Christian behavior is not to look or act like the pagan world around them. And what was that? It was a life of immorality. It was a way that people, and even the pagans today, if St. Paul was answering this question, he would say even pagan women didn't dress the way some of these so-called Christian women dress today. We do have to be mindful of that. And the fathers of the church, including St. John Chrysostom, say that a woman bears some responsibility. Now, it's not entirely her responsibility, but I've, been around college students I was around college students for 20 years. There was, I had taught a class on early Christianity, and we did discuss this because I had the students do a reading from Tertullian and a reading by Clement of Alexandria about how men and women should dress, the dress of Christian women. And Tertullian is very harsh in his assessment of Christian women. Tertullian was a Latin writer of the church around the year 200, and Clement wrote in Greek around the same time, but in Alexandria. And they were very critical of the way Christian men and women dressed in a way that does not reflect what they say they believe. If you say you're a Christian, your lifestyle and the presentation that you make of yourself in public should reflect that. Okay, so the girls in the class, we would have class discussions about these readings. The girls were kind of offended sometimes by this, and they would say, well, if the guy doesn't like it, he just shouldn't look. Well, the problem is, what is he supposed to do? Look at the ground all the time, or look at the sky? At the time when I started teaching in the university, it was a sort of Britney Spears era. It was in 2002 when I started at the University of San Diego. And at that time, all of the girls, the skirts were very low cut, and the pants were also sat very low on the hip. This was how Britney Spears was dressing. And the shirts were very short, and the midriff was bare. So that's not so popular anymore. But if you can, I felt bad for the guys. What are they supposed to do? They're walking to class, and a girl is walking toward them dressed that way, or he's behind the girl walking to class. All he's doing is trying to mind his own business, but he can't help but see it. It's not when it's too flippant of women to say, just don't look. That's ridiculous. You can't unsee something. That's why we have to be careful. Not simply in our dress, but also in what images we allow into our home, the kinds of programs we watch on TV, what we allow our children to be exposed to. There's a lot of titillation out there, in things that have become really very acceptable in mainstream culture, were things that we never would have seen on television not so long ago. And this is kind of a slippery slope. We just accept more and more and more, and then we begin to think, well, it's normal. But we have to recognize, Chrysostom says, that the woman has a dagger. She gives him the dagger, and then the man, uses it on himself. So first he said she uses the dagger on him. Then he reversed that. He said, no, she has it, and he uses it. So he does hold both parties responsible, but women cannot be so insensitive, because we know what we're doing by how we dress. So we can't act like we don't know what we're doing. We know what we're doing. And if your point is to exaggerate your sexuality by the way you dress, you can't tell men, well, just pluck your eyes out or don't look. It's ridiculous. It's unfair. It's unchristian, and it's unloving. Okay, so you could look at it in a lot of different ways. Now, kind of somewhat related to this was another email that I received this week. And here it is. Dear Dr. Jeannie, I have a question regarding Holy Communion. In Romania, if you go to a monastery, You are always told to wait for the men to take Holy Communion first, and only then will they let the women. I thought of many reasons why, but I do wonder, is this just a tradition here, because she's in Romania, or is it really dogma? And if so, what is the real reason? Sometimes I feel hurt by it, or rather the tone of voice taken by the priests and monks when giving this command. But I know it is because I'm proud, and so I try not to feel offended. Thanks so much, Alexandra from Romania. So let's start off because she says, is this a tradition or is this dogma? I want to say right away, we have to be very careful how we use the term dogma. In Orthodoxy, dogma are essential teachings of the faith. This is not an essential teaching. And usually dogma is about the person of God, the Holy Trinity, the eternal, uncreated nature of the Son of God, that the Spirit proceeds from the Father, the Trinity, these kinds of things. That's dogma, that the Son became incarnate, that the Father is unoriginate, that's dogma in the Orthodox world. So be very careful. Don't throw around that word dogma, and don't easily call somebody a heretic. That's bad also. A lot of people say, oh, that's a heretical, or you're a heretic, or he or she's a heretic. Don't get involved in those decisions, calling people heretics or saying that something is dogma. These are words that are intended to be used more precisely than most people use them today. So no, it is not dogma, but it is a tradition, and it's a custom in Orthodox monasteries, not simply in Romania, but in other parts of the world also. I've been to quite a few monasteries, and that does seem to be the custom, where the men receive first and then the women. Now, they also stand in separate parts of the church. The women are standing on the left and the men are standing on the right. And there are churches, parish churches, where that is still the custom. It's still a custom, by the way. That custom is still practiced among the Copts and among the Indian Orthodox, where they don't all stand on the same side of the church, okay? So that's an old custom. Now, Alexandra was right to question how she reacted to it. I kind of wonder if it wasn't the tone of voice in which the monk used when he made this, gave this instruction. If it sounded very severe, now you women, you wait until the men receive first, that might have been off-putting. And for those of you out there who are monastics, you might consider just saying it in a very matter-of-fact manner. This is our custom. First, the men are communed, and then the women. Say it in that way, rather than as though you're admonishing the women to wait. Most women who visit monasteries do wait, okay? If not, then there's somebody who could ask them nicely to wait, okay? So, but we don't know how the person sounded, but definitely that was a temptation for Alexandra to react against it. So this was a temptation of the evil one to use that against her, but she conquered that because she decided that it was her pride who was reacting to that. So she learned a good lesson from this. So what I want to say about that is this, because I do want to talk about these practices and women in Orthodoxy, because it is something that does come up. We have to mention, first of all, that we have to remember where we are. We are in a monastery. We are not in a parish church. Even if that was the case in a parish church, we have to respect the customs of that place. A church is not an ordinary place, and certainly a monastery is not an ordinary place, and it is not a parish church. So when we go there, we have to conform to them. We don't expect the monastics to conform to us, because in the world, the usual thing is ladies first, right? Or women and children first, but not in a monastery. Now, why is that? Perhaps someone who's a monastic who's listening to this, because some monks do listen to this program, they might tell me if there's some reason for it. My guess is it might simply be for the reason we talked about before. They don't want the men following the women in line because the men might be distracted. I think that's a possibility, but I don't know. Maybe there is no real reason, but that's simply their practice or their custom. It might also be because it was, she said monastery. We use that term interchangeably for both men's monasteries and women's. But if it was a men's monastery, it could simply be so that the monks would go first, and then that's what usually happens. The monks will receive first, and then other men, and then other visitors who are women. Okay, so they have an order. Now, so how should women react to this or anything else that strikes them as some kind of a slight, okay, that they're being put down? We should accept these things with humility rather than take offense at it, which is exactly what the evil one wants us to do. And we should be aware of that. It's hard to convince someone of this who doesn't have a spiritual orientation or just doesn't really think in those terms. I'm not trying to pretend like I'm all this very spiritual person or anything like that. But I remember once when I was visiting the St. Anthony's Monastery in Florence, Arizona, and I was in the parking lot, and there was a father who was trying to convince his daughter to put on the long skirt. She had shorts on. It was Arizona. It was warm. She was wearing shorts, and she must have gone in with a family to visit this monastery. And there's a kind of an open courtyard, and they will give you a scarf or a long skirt if you don't have one. And this teenage girl was highly offended by that, and she refused to enter the monastery. And her father was trying to explain this is how people dress at a monastery. She wouldn't hear anything of it. And so sometimes people have that reaction. Now, she was immature. She was young and immature. And also she wasn't appropriately, we could say, taught about how the evil one entices us to have these kinds of reactions. What could she have? What spiritual benefit might she have received by visiting the monastery? Maybe she would have received a very wonderful spiritual experience. But instead, the evil one enticed her to be offended by the fact that the monks asked her to put on a skirt. And so she refused to go in the monastery. I don't know if she ever did, but I have to tell you, because I think it's kind of funny. I've been to that monastery many times and many other monasteries. And one time I thought my skirt was long enough. And it was about, 3 inches above my ankles. And I wasn't wearing socks. So some skin was showing, but I thought the skirt was long enough. They pulled me out of church and told me to put on another skirt, or I put on something underneath it or over it or whatever. So that's happened to me too. Okay, I thought it was kind of amusing because I thought it was long enough, but because I think they told me this too, I wasn't wearing socks. You could see my skin. Okay, so there you go. Now, that having been said, there was a time when Father Costa and I were in Cyprus, and we were passing by this very famous monastery called Kiko, one of the most famous monasteries, probably the most famous monastery in Cyprus. And because we were passing by and we were with his cousin, they said, let's stop and go to this monastery. And I said, you guys, I'm not dressed for the monastery. I was wearing was dressed with no sleeves. And I think it went to mid-calf, but I didn't have a scarf. I wasn't prepared. They said, well, I want to see this monk that Father Costa knew. So we went. And right away when I met this monk, I apologized for how I was dressed. And he said, don't worry, I am not tempted by arms and legs. Okay. So he was very gracious about it. And frankly, I've seen more flexibility with that in places like Greece and Cyprus than in some of the monasteries here in the United States, where they seem to be stricter, actually, to tell you the truth. At least that's been my experience. So what about this idea that is coming with this? We're not just talking about the dress of women, but in this case, but a kind of, what Alexandra was reacting to is this kind of misogynism among some Orthodox men. I don't think we can deny that is a reality. And I'm certainly not defending it, because there are Orthodox men that have kind of a bad attitude toward women, or an attitude of superiority. I'm not accusing monks of this. I'm talking about, I think, even maybe more so among lay men, not so much among the monastics. But there's this idea that somehow there's a sort of superiority because they are men. And that's a sin. It can be very subtle, but believe me, women notice it, okay? And we experience the sting of that. We experience a sense of kind of a degradation, or at least feel that men should be perhaps more sensitive to our situation in the church and not almost lord that over us, even if it's unspoken. We can feel it. And I'll give you an example. A woman chanter that I know, she was telling me that it was Holy Week, and they were discussing what happens is before the services, or especially very complex services or something different like a consecration or something like this, the priests will often consult with the chanters in the sanctuary, in the Holy of Holies. And then they come out, and then they've had their little meeting there. They didn't invite her back there because the women don't usually enter the sanctuary. Not that they can't, that's a different subject here, but that they don't. That's kind of become our tradition. And so they've had their meeting, and she's excluded. Now, can they have their little discussion right by the door, by the north door or the south door, so she can hear the instructions of the priest? Yes, they could. But did they think of that? No, they didn't. Instead, she's kind of in the dark. So she felt that they were very insensitive to the fact that she didn't know what was going on. They had their meeting. Everybody knew what was going to happen in the service, what was going to be repeated, what was going to be cut out, and she was kind of left in the dark. And I think that's just insensitivity on the part of the other chanters and the priest. So, but this is something that happens. Now, my concern is this. Of course, this should not happen. But we can look at this. Let's take a look at this from a spiritual perspective. Is this problem, because I'm going back to Alexandra's question, is this problem a problem for men or for women? You might say, well, it's a problem for women. But I'm telling you, I think it's more of a problem for men. And that's why men should be careful about this as well, and about what kind of message they're giving about women or to other men, okay? And the reason is because by having this attitude that somehow they are superior, simply because they are men, let's face it, simply because of their physicality, this is very harmful to men. This is something that could actually hinder their salvation. Whereas a woman, if she is tempted to feel that she has been somehow humiliated by a man, she can use that to her advantage by accepting it and remaining silent. Okay? So the person who has experienced some kind of humility is more likely to benefit from that. That it's harder when you're the person who feels that you're somehow above women or superior to women, okay? I really doubt that many men who listen to this podcast have this problem, but I know it exists. And I've seen people online say, there was actually somebody, I don't know if it was a priest or monk, said, I forbid you to listen to Dr. Jeannie. She's a woman and women have no authority to teach and all this. We've already been through that. I've already discussed that on my podcast when we went through exactly what St. Paul said. Chrysostom would agree with me, not with him, but nonetheless, definitely that attitude that you shouldn't, is very Protestant, by the way, that women are not allowed to teach. They have to have this very subservient place in the church. That is not orthodoxy. That's not the ancient church. That's a very Protestant interpretation of St. Paul. It's not even patristic. So, when we read spiritual writings, there's something else I want to mention to you before we move on to our subject. When we read spiritual writings, we have to remember the context. When we are in a place like a church, like a monastery, we have to remember our physical context. Otherwise, the evil one uses these things against us. And when we're talking about the context of these spiritual writings, for example, you must remember that almost all Orthodox spiritual writings are written by monks for monks. And I mean male monks, not female monks, monks for male monks. And so you might read something that says that women are the source of temptation and they should be avoided. Well, of course, because if it's a monk writing for another male monk, You have to remember the context. What's he going to say? Yes, be around women. Don't worry about it. Just pluck your eyes out if you're tempted by them. You understand what I'm trying to say? You have to be smart about this. Of course, they're going to tell other men to avoid women so as not to be tempted. You can't take that statement and say, oh, the Orthodox Church or these monasticism is misogynistic. It's not a blanket condemnation of all women. If we take it that way, then we're just showing our ignorance and our lack of sensitivity to the time and the culture and the context. Who wrote it and to whom was he writing? So Chrysostom himself has often been criticized for being a misogynist. I devoted a whole lesson to that once. Is he a misogynist or is he an anti-Semite? Well, sometimes Chrysostom criticizes women for things like vanity, etc. But he also praises women when they deserve it. He doesn't say negative things about all women all the time. And the same thing for men. He condemns men for getting angry too easily or for being greedy or lustful or something like this. He doesn't consistently praise all men. He's a pastor. He applies whatever is needed for whoever his audience is. So nobody says, when he says something negative about men, nobody takes that to mean all men. Nobody says he hates men. So we have to recognize the context in which a statement is made, and also when we're visiting a monastery, the context in which a statement was made in a monastery, and that we have to conform to their practices. Otherwise, the evil one is using these things to bolster our pride or to turn us away from the church. All right, now, I do have a wonderful statement by St. Paisios on this, which I think is really worth listening to. So we're going to take a listen to it after the break. Okay, join me then.
Dr. Constantinou will be back in a moment, but the lines are open for your calls. The number is 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
Did you know that more than 80 ancient faith books are available as audiobooks? So you can be listening whether you're taking a road trip or weeding your garden. See them all at store.ancientfaith.com/audiobooks.
The crucifixion and resurrection of Christ are central events in our salvation. Yet few Christians have a good grasp of the first-century historical and religious context in which the crucifixion took place, nor of its true significance for the people of that time, and hence for our time as well. In her book, The Crucifixion of the King of Glory, biblical scholar Dr. Jeannie Constantinou puts modern readers in the center of the events of Christ's Passion, bringing the best of modern scholarship to bear while keeping her interpretation faithful in every particular to the early church tradition. If you love Search the Scriptures live on Ancient Faith Radio, you'll also love The Crucifixion of the King of Glory, available now at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We are back with Search the Scriptures Live with Dr. Jeannie Constantinou. Have a question about the verses we are studying tonight? Give her a call at 855-237-2346. Here once again is Dr. Jeannie.
Okay, so let's see what St. Paisios says about being careful concerning how the evil one sort of tricks us and uses our reactions to things to judge other people, how that is more harmful for us than the person, of course, we are being judged. So here is a question that was being asked by a nun. Sometimes, Yerunda, I get upset with the sister I work with and I judge her. Well, here's Paisios' response. Do you have any idea how many devils that sister might be struggling against at that particular time? Perhaps she was being attacked by 50 demons who were trying to make her fall, so that you would say, that's what she is. And then when the demons see that you have condemned her, 500 of them will attack her at once in order to make her fall in front of you again, so that you can condemn her even more. For instance, you might say to her, "Sister, don't put this item there. Its place is over here." The next day, the evil one will make her forget what you said, and she will put the same item in the wrong place again. She might even make another mistake, and you will think to yourself, "Just yesterday I told her to be careful, and today she has put the item in the wrong place again." And then she made other mistakes as well. And so you condemn her and can't contain yourself from speaking out. "Sister, did I not instruct you to not place that item over there? This is disorderliness." Well, that's it. The devil has done his work. He not only led you to condemn her, but also to estrange yourself from her. And she, not being aware that you were the cause of her carelessness, will feel guilty for scandalizing you and slip into sorrow. Do you see how cunningly the little devil works his evil and how easily we cave in? And that's just for something, can you imagine, between nuns, let alone some girl wearing something very revealing and expecting men to simply not look or take their eyes out or something silly. Of course, that's hyperbole. Jesus didn't tell men to take their eyes out, only to remove the temptation from them. So continuing with Paisios here, "This is the reason why we mustn't judge anyone. We should only judge the devils who were once angels and ended up being demons. Instead of repenting, these demons became even more evil and cunning, determined to destroy the creatures of God. In other words, the demon not only leads people into making mistakes and doing strange things, he also puts judgmental thoughts into another person's mind so that that person condemns them. Then he triumphs over both those that err and those that condemn. And while those who are led into making mistakes feel guilty and repent, those who condemn justify themselves, become prideful, and end up with the very same downfall as the evil one, pride." So I hope you agree that that was a pretty useful passage there from St. Paisios, because I've tried to tell you this many times. We have to take this very, very seriously, how the evil one tricks us into doing the wrong thing. And we should also recognize that sometimes when we get annoyed with people because they're making little mistakes, that too is a temptation from the evil one, because we don't know what they're going through. Here he said some other sister might be going through some kind of temptation. It simply could be that they're having a difficult time in their personal life. They're worried about something. They're not feeling well. And then we jump all over them. And then they might feel badly about it and even repent, whereas we have justified ourselves, and it's just feeding our pride. So there you go. Anyhow, let us continue with St. Matthew's Gospel. We're in chapter 7, finishing up the Sermon on the Mount. And the first section is about not casting your pearls before swine, etc. "Do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before swine, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you." So what does he mean here by holy food? Well, the holy food would be, for the Jews at the time of Christ, this was meat that had been offered to God in sacrifice. You don't give that to a dog, okay? That's inappropriate. They're not the ones for whom this sacrifice, the sacrificial meat, was intended. Now, in some of the cases, when there was a sacrifice at the temple, sometimes the entire animal was burnt, but not usually. Usually only parts of the animal were burnt, and the rest was either kept by the priest or sometimes given back to the person who made the offering. So to feed this offering meat, what has been given to God or dedicated to God, because the sacrifice is something dedicated to God, right? It's an act of worship. To give that to dogs is absolutely inappropriate, as is giving pearls to swine, because they don't appreciate the treasure. They don't appreciate how precious it is this thing that they have been given. So what does this have to do with judging? Because this is the context in which these things are being said. Judge not, lest ye be judged. And here he continues here in verse 6, don't give what is holy to the dogs or pearls to swine. Well, the Lord is using this metaphor to encourage us to make judgments about what is appropriate for each person. So when people say, judge not lest ye be judged, that's not a reason to give everything to everybody, okay? Especially here, we're talking about holy things. In our situation, we're not talking about the Jewish temple, but we're talking about the church, okay? And the teachings of the church and the things of the church, okay? We have to be careful. We have to make judgments about what is appropriate for each person, that they receive something that is precious and holy. I'll give you a couple of examples. I think I've mentioned this before. I don't really want to talk about myself, but when in the car, I keep envelopes with money, bills, $5 $10, $20. And if I see a person who's begging, a homeless person or whatever, I will give them that money in an envelope. So originally I thought about putting a paper icon in there, but I didn't, because I didn't know how that person would react to it. Would they treasure that icon the way I would? Or would they spit on it or step on it? Or, you see what I'm trying to say? Now, it's just a paper icon. But the question is, how would they treat that thing, which is a holy image? We have to consider that. And so the Lord is telling us to take care with things that are precious, especially things that are holy, and make judgments about whether or not it is appropriate to share that with another person. Okay? So I'll give you another example. Somebody told me about this. I think it was an Orthodox priest told me about this, that, in the Catholic Church, the custom now is to receive communion in the hand. That wasn't the custom until, relatively recently. The priest would put it on, people would open their mouths, they would place the wafer, the host, on the person's tongue. And they were supposed to sort of let it dissolve and then maybe chew it a little bit. But this practice changed to allow people to receive it in their hands, and then they place it in their own mouth. Now, somebody told me that he had seen somebody, and they don't discriminate. When somebody gets in a line to receive communion, you hold your hands and they put it in there. They don't ask you if you're Catholic or even if you're a Christian. And I think it was an Orthodox priest who told me that once he had seen a mass, and somebody stepped to the side and went around, to the side of the church and was kind of playing with the host. They were flipping it around, throwing it up in the air and that sort of a thing. In other words, treating it with a lot of disrespect. That person probably wasn't Catholic, okay? But it's an example of why we have to be careful. And it's a reason why we do not practice inner communion, because the person is not aware of what they're receiving, or they don't accept what they're receiving. To them, it's just, a symbol. Well, it's not for us. It's much more than that. And so if we give it to them, that's not going to be for their good. It's going to be really for their condemnation if they don't recognize what they're receiving, okay? So here's St. John Chrysostom on this passage. By dogs here, he figuratively described those who are living in incurable ungodliness and affording no hope of changing for the better. And by swine, those that abide continually in an unchaste life. So when we talk about why certain people are forbidden to receive communion, let's say they have committed a serious sin. If you have committed a serious sin and you know who you are, you're not supposed to receive communion. You're supposed to go to confession first. Okay? And then when the priest feels it's appropriate, then you receive communion. But to act as though communion is always good, it's not true. We say in the communion prayers, let this not be received to my judgment and condemnation, because we know that there are times when we should not receive, especially if we have committed a serious sin. If you're not sure, talk to your priest, okay? So here, the Lord is saying, don't give these holy things to the dogs or swine, Because, by the way, they're not talking about your pet dogs, okay? I know we think about our dogs. Oh, I don't have any dogs, but we have pets and we love them, right? People love their pets and they talk about them as if they're a member of the family. Now people call themselves a pet parent and all this thing. But look, it's still a dog, okay? Now, in ancient times, dogs were not pets. They were dirty and they were mangy. And you see this in other parts of the world, including Greece, where there's a lot of dogs that just live in the streets. And they're not a pet that you would want to lick you or you would hug or anything like this because they're very dirty. So this is why he's talking about dogs. He's not talking about some well-groomed little, Pomeranian that you have in your house. But still, you wouldn't give communion to your dog, right? You shouldn't give antiveron to your dog. You shouldn't use holy things on your dog, okay? Even though you love them, they're not a person. They don't have any appreciation for what this is. They don't recognize the holiness of it. But here, as St. John Chrysostom said, he's talking about people who live unclean lives, sinful lives. Now, he says they're unworthy of hearing these things. Now, we are beginning to understand what Chrysostom is thinking about. He's thinking about people who are not part of the church. So he says, he commands us not to open the doors to them, for indeed they become more insolent after learning. Since then, from their nature, they are unable to learn, let the thing be hidden. Okay, he's talking about, quoting St. Paul there, that at least out of ignorance, these things might be revealed to them. So here he's talking about the fact that even in Chrysostom's time, even though not only was the Christian faith legal by then, we're talking about the 390s, year 400, when Chrysostom was a pastor and first a presbyter and then Archbishop of Constantinople, not only was the Christian faith legal, but it was the official religion of the Roman Empire. And yet, people could not witness Holy Communion or the last part of the Divine Liturgy. We know that prior to the recitation of the Creed, we say the doors, so that anyone who was not illuminated, somebody who was unbaptized, was not to hear these things. They were considered sacred, okay? So Chrysostom says about this, that if somebody doesn't know these things, neither let him see it, lest he trample it underfoot. For nothing results beyond greater mischief to them that are so disposed when they hear. For both the holy things are profaned by them, not knowing what they are, and the more they are lifted up and armed against us. Let them hear, who shamelessly associate withal and make the awful things, by awful he means like the awe-inspiring holy things, contemptible. For the mysteries we too therefore celebrate with closed doors and keep out the uninitiated, the unbaptized, not for any weakness of our rights, not because we have anything to be ashamed of, not because there's something wrong with what we do, but because the many, as of now, are imperfectly prepared to receive them. So they took this very seriously, and it's unfortunate that today, especially on the internet, people are discussing some of the most sacred theology of the Orthodox Church, okay, with people who have no business discussing it because they cannot understand. So it's not our business to explain all things to all people. It's simply not appropriate. We have to have some discernment. We need to understand when it's appropriate to talk about things and what it is appropriate to discuss. So here is St. Gregory Palamas on this subject. If any of you amuses himself with gluttony, excessive drinking, self-indulgent pleasure, and drunkenness, he should stop. Otherwise, he receives the heavenly seed, the words of instruction, to no avail, and will not be shown to be a fruitful field for God. You all know that when sown fields are too wet, they do not produce crops. So how can a heart sodden with self-indulgence and wine drinking display heavenly fruits? If anyone has fallen into any sort of impure fornication, let him turn back and give up and cleanse himself through repentance. If he wallows in this filth, how can he keep safe within him the holy mirror which he receives? He means the chrismation. How can he keep safe within him the holy mirror that which he receives, the pearl of great price, by which I mean the word of salvation? Pearls are not given to pigs, and people in their right mind do not mix myrrh with mud. So that's St. Gregory Palamas. Now, after telling us to be careful about what we share with others and be careful not to share or give holy things to the dogs, the Lord gives us instructions on prayer. He's really wrapping up the Sermon on the Mount here. And this is another passage that often confuses people. Ask and it will be given to you. This is verse 7, Matthew 7:7. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. Or what man of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for fish, would give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father, who is in heaven, give good things to those who ask him? Okay. So the first point let's make is that when he says those of you who are evil, he is not saying that human nature is evil. He's just using that as a contrast to the great goodness of God. Only God is truly good. The rest of us all have sin. Okay. But he's making a very strong contrast. And this is what we've been seeing throughout the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus using hyperbole, making very strong statements to bring home his message. So here's what St. John Chrysostom said about this. And this is a passage I think that sometimes perplexes people because Jesus is promising to answer our prayers, and yet many of us have prayed and we feel like our prayers were not answered, right? So of course we've all had that experience. So here's St. John Chrysostom on this passage. And I like the very first thing he says. He said we are not ourselves to strive alone, but also to invoke help from above. I like this. And you know why? Because sometimes when we are tempted, when we're facing some kind of temptation, we try to white knuckle our way through it, whether the temptation is to, tell somebody off, or to eat something we're not supposed to eat, or to imbibe too much in alcohol, or whatever it is, or to follow through with a lustful thought. We are determined not to fall for this temptation. And so we, white knuckle, that's the expression in English. We just clench our fists and we are determined not to do it. But what Chrysostom is pointing out here is that we're not supposed to try to do it by ourselves to resist these temptations. Or to try to make our way through life without asking for help. The Lord is telling us to ask for help. That's the first point that Chrysostom makes, and it's a wonderful point. And we find when we try to respond to a temptation, not by exercising our own personal so-called willpower, but by praying about it, we will find that we are able to overcome these temptations much more easily with the help of God, with prayer. But we forget about that. Yet we don't do it as often as we should. So here's Chrysostom. He says we should not do this. We should not strive alone, but ask for help from above, and it will surely come and be present with us and will aid in our struggles and make all easy. Therefore, he both commanded us to ask and he pledged himself to the giving. In other words, he promised that he will hear our prayers. However, not simply did he command us to ask, but with much diligence and earnestness, for this is the meaning of seek. Seek and you will find. For the one who seeks puts all other things out of his mind and is taken up with that alone which is sought, and forms no idea of the present persons. And this is about this, I'm saying what I know about. Many who have lost either gold or servants are continually seeking after them. By seeking, he declared this, and by knocking, that we approach with earnestness and with a glowing mind. So he's saying that people don't stop looking for something that's been lost that is valuable to them or important to them. As he continues, Chrysostom says, "Do not be despondent, O man, nor show less zeal about virtue than you do for wealth. For things of that kind, money, property, right, you have often sought and not found. And nevertheless, though you know this, you are sure not to find them. You put in every motion to search. But here, although having a promise that you will surely receive, you do not even show the smallest part of earnestness. And if you do not receive straight away, do not even then despair. For this purpose, he said, knock, to signify that even if he does not open the door right away, we are to continue there, continue knocking." So he says, when it comes to worldly things, we really put in a lot of effort, don't we? And whether it is to get a job promotion or to improve our house or to save money or to get a new car or to get through school, we put in a lot of effort. And we know that we have to do that to achieve what we want. But when it comes to spiritual things, we try a little bit and then we stop. Okay? But if we would persist in prayer, we would receive what we sought. And that is a promise by the Lord. So then, of course, he says, if you doubt my affirmation, at least believe his example. So what example did the Lord give? And the example he gave is from our own lives. Which man is of you, if his son asks for bread, would give him a stone? And if he asks for, a fish, would give him a snake? Think about that. If your child asks you for a piece of bread, would you give him a stone? Of course not. That's reprehensible. And so Chrysostom's saying that the Lord gives this example because we understand that as human beings. We love our children and we will give them what they ask. We would certainly not give them a stone or a snake, right? And so he says it is the same with God. If we continue asking, even if we don't receive immediately, we will receive. And if the door is shut, this is so that he might induce you to knock. And for this reason, he does not straightway assent, that you might ask. Now, he doesn't really elaborate on this, but we know what he's talking about here. We know from the lives of the saints and from other spiritual writings that God wants us to seek him. He doesn't answer right away so that we will develop this desire for God, okay? And to show that we are worthy of having our prayer answered, and because we're really not worthy, of course, of all of the blessings of God, but we have to exert some effort to show that we really mean it and that we really want him in our lives. And when we don't exert that kind of effort, then why should he respond to our prayers? Because we don't really care that much. I'm continuing here with Chrysostom. Continue then to do these things, and you will surely receive. Now, you might say, what if I should ask and do not receive? He has hindered your approach with that comparison. Again, framing the arguments by those human things, and by the comparison he means we understand what it is to be parents. If our children ask us for food, we're not going to give them something that they can't eat, okay? So he says, this is why the Lord gave that comparison, so that we will have assurance that he will hear and respond to our prayer. So that if you do not receive, Chrysostom is saying, we ought to be confident about these things and not only ask, but ask what we ought to ask. So think about the example from that example that the Lord gave. If your son asks for bread, would you give him a stone? If he asks for fish, would you give him a snake? Of course, the answer is no. But what the son is asking for, what the child is asking for, is not inappropriate. So we have to continually be asking and also ask for the things that are appropriate. So that example that the Lord gives teaches us two things: to persist and that God will respond, or we could add three things. And the part of the question is, we have to remember that we have to be asking for something that is appropriate, all right? Not for things that are not good for us. So Chrysostom says, if you do not receive, the cause of your not receiving is that you are asking for a stone, even though you are a son. This is not sufficient for you to receive. Rather, this very thing is what hinders your receiving, that being a son, you are asking for what is not profitable. Now, we think, of course, we know what's good for us, right? That's why we're asking for these things from God. We even think we're asking for something very spiritual. We think we're asking for something that's good for us, but we don't know what's good for us. Just like little children don't know what's good for them. You know, they want to have candy for breakfast, or Coke for breakfast or something like this. So they don't know what's good for them and what's not good for them. That's for the parent to decide. And so we have to recognize that if our prayer is not answered, even something that we think is good and spiritual, there's a reason why we have not received the answer. We have not received what we have asked, okay? So Chrysostom says, ask for nothing worldly, but for all things spiritual, and you will surely receive. What if, someone says, I even ask spiritual things and do not receive? You did not knock with earnestness. This is Chrysostom's reply. Remember, he always tells us what his congregation is thinking. You did not knock with earnestness, or you made yourself unworthy to receive, or you quickly abandoned the request because you didn't get it right away. Do not say then, I drew nigh and did not receive. For in no case is it because of God that we do not receive, because God loves us so much as to even surpass human fathers. So his point here is that Christ promised us, and God is faithful to his promises. But we have to do certain things too. We have to be worthy. We have to ask for the right things. And we have to be persistent in prayer. And I think that this is the part that we fail. This is really where we fail. We don't ask for things that are not good for us, and we kind of give up. We say, I'm going to pray every day about this, and then after a while, we kind of give up, okay? So let's take a break, and when we return, we're going to hear what St. John of Kronstadt says about this, ask and you shall receive, and also what St. Cyril of Alexandria says about it. Join me after the break.
Dr. Constantinou will be back in a moment, but the lines are open for your calls. The number is 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
This is Elisa Bielatich-Davis. Join me, Mother Catherine Weston, and Dr. Edith Humphrey, guest speakers at this year's Ancient Faith Women's Retreat. Visit store.ancientfaith.com/events for details and to register.
So here's a question for you. What does it mean to think Orthodox? What are the unspoken and unexplored premises and presumptions underlying what Christians believe? Orthodox Christianity is based on preserving the mind of the early church, its phronima. Dr. Jeannie Constantinou brings her more than 40 years' experience as a professor, Bible teacher, and speaker to bear in explaining what the Orthodox phronima is, how it can be acquired, and how that phronima is expressed in true Orthodox theology, as practiced by those who are properly qualified by both training and a deep relationship with Christ. Thinking Orthodox, now available at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We are back with Search the Scriptures Live with Dr. Jeannie Constantinou. Have a question about the verses we are studying tonight? Give her a call at 855-237-2346. Here once again is Dr. Jeannie.
Okay, so we're listening to now St. John of Kronstadt and what he says regarding prayer. And that admonition of the Lord to ask and, it shall be given to you, etc. He has a long discussion of this, but I'm just going to give you a little part of it. Many do not pray because it seems to them that God has not granted that for which they have prayed in the past, or because they consider it unnecessary to pray. They say that God knows everything without asking, and forget that it is said, "Ask, and it shall be given to you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened to you." Such men do not see that they have no faith, the Christian's most precious inheritance, which is as necessary as life itself, and that they are going to destruction. Now, before we go on any further, we already talked about this question of whether or not we really need to pray because God knows everything we need. So we already talked about that early on in chapter 6, when the Lord was giving instructions about prayer, and Chrysostom addressed this as well. Continuing with St. John of Kronstadt, it is not enough for you, or rather, is it not enough for you to see weakness in men? Do you wish to see weakness in God himself, secretly thinking that God cannot fulfill your prayer? To men, many things are difficult and many impossible. But how can you consider anything as difficult to God? Can anything be difficult or impossible to him? To him, all things are possible, and nothing is difficult. When you pray, then, be firmly convinced that the Lord can do everything you ask in a moment. Do not ascribe your own inability to God. Remember that to him nothing is impossible, and to ask boldly for everything, hoping to receive everything. If you wish to ask of God any blessing, then prepare yourself before praying by undoubting and firm faith, and take precautions against doubt and unbelief in good time. For if during the prayer itself your heart wavers in its faith and does not stand firm, it will go ill with you. Do not expect to obtain from the Lord that for which you have prayed doubtingly, for in so doing you have offended the Lord, and God does not bestow his gifts upon a reviler. This, and he quotes here, "And all things, whatever you ask in prayer, believing you shall receive, said the Lord." This clearly implies that if you doubt and do not believe, you will not receive. Oh my goodness. Well, okay, so I'm going to have to pass on the one with St. Gregory, let's see, St. Cyril of Alexandria, because I put down the wrong page number and now I cannot find it. So we'll have to let that one go for this time. Unfortunately, I usually try to make sure that I don't have that problem, but I messed up. So forgive me for that. Everything I choose for you is really nice, so I'm disappointed. Oh, wait a minute. There it is. I've got it. I found it. Okay, 321. Alrighty. So let's hear from St. Cyril of Alexandria. Okay. Now come and let us transfer to the truth what was shown in the form of a parable. Be urgent in prayer, draw near to God, who loves to be kind, and constantly. And if you see that the gift of grace is delayed, do not yield to weariness, despair not of the expected blessing, do not abandon the hope that is set before you, nor further foolishly say within yourself, I have drawn near frequently, I have gained absolutely nothing, I have wept, and I have received not, I have supplicated, but have not been accepted. For all that I asked, nothing has been accomplished. Rather think thus within yourself, that he who is the universal treasure house knows our state better than we do, in that he weighs for every person what is due and suitable for him. You ask sometimes what is beyond your measure. You wish to receive those things which you are not yet worthy of. The giver himself knows the time that is suitable for his gifts. Earthly fathers do not immediately and without discretion fulfill the desires of their sons and daughters, but they often delay, in spite of their asking, not because they have a grudging hand, nor again because they regard what is pleasant to the petitioners, but as considering what is useful and necessary for their good conduct? And how will that rich and bounteous giver neglect the due accomplishment for people of what they pray for, unless, of course, without all doubt, he knows that it would not be for their benefit to receive what they ask? We must, therefore, offer our prayers to God with knowledge as well as with assiduity, and even though there may be some delay in the requests, we should continue patiently with the request, being well assured that what is gained without toil and readily won is usually despised, whereas that which is gathered with labor is more pleasant and an abiding possession. So here what he's alluding to is the fact that when we have to pray a lot for something, we actually grow spiritually. And that's part of the reason why God might delay responding to our request. He wants us to seek him because this is how we develop a closer relationship with God. So it's really bad for us to give up praying because we don't receive what we requested immediately. But perhaps you say to yourself, I draw near frequently, making requests, but I'm not slothful in supplications, but persevering. Who will assure me that I shall receive? I say to you, it is the bestower of the divine gifts, who himself enters and speaks. I say to you, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be open to you. For everyone that asks shall receive, and he who seeks shall find. Whoever knocks, it will be open to him. In these words I say to you, that has the full force of an oath. For God is not false, even though the promise is not accompanied with an oath, but to show that the littleness of their faith was groundless, he sometimes confirms it with an oath. For the Savior has also in many places prefaced his words by saying, truly, truly, I say unto you. In telling us therefore to seek, he bids us to labor. For by labor, that which is needed is always, so to say, found, especially when it is something fit for us to possess. He who knocks, not once, but again and again, rattles the door with his hand, it may be, or with a stone, or again, so that the master of the house, unable to endure the annoyance of the knocks, will open it even against his will. Learn, therefore, even from what happens among us, he means human beings, these images the Lord gives us so that we can relate to them, is what he's saying. It's not that God has to be bothered. It's not that. But he's making this example so that we can learn from it. When you persistently knock, eventually the person opens the door. Learn, therefore, from what happens among us, human beings, the way to gain that which is thy profit. Knock, be urgent, ask. So must all act who ask anything from God. For the wise, Paul writes, pray without ceasing. Isn't that nice? I'm glad I found the page number. Okay, very good. So, as we continue now, we come to the golden rule. The golden rule. And what is the golden rule? This is verse 12. Therefore, he begins with the word therefore. Whatever you wish that men would do to you, do so to them. For thus is the law and the prophets. And so this is called the golden rule. Now, the reason why I made a point of pointing out to you that he begins this verse by saying, therefore, here in my translation, it actually says so, but you understand that it's a conclusion. In other words, it is a summary of everything that has come before. We're getting to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, but this is a summary. Whatever you want people to do to you, do it to them. So it has often been noted that all major religions have a similar rule, but Christ is the only one who gave this rule, which is called the golden rule. Other religions have what is sometimes referred to as the silver rule. Now, if you know anything right now, what's going on in the world, silver is worth a lot less than gold. Silver is at like $27 or $28 an ounce, and gold is about close to $2,000 American dollars an ounce. That's a huge disparity. And that, I was thinking, I should have looked up the exact amount, but there's a big difference between the price of gold and the price of silver. And that's the difference between the Lord's golden rule and the so-called silver rule that's found in other religions, such as Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam or Judaism. The silver rule is, whatever you do not want people to do to you, do not do it to them. That's called the silver rule, all right? It's not the same as the golden rule, is it? What's the difference between do unto others what you would have them do to you, and do not do to others what you would not have them do to you? The difference is immense, because Christ's rule, the golden rule, is proactive. It requires us to act rather than simply to refrain from doing harm. The silver rule, do not do to others what you would not have them do to you, simply requires us to not hurt other people, okay, to avoid doing something that we wouldn't want done to us. But Christ's rule is urging us and requiring us to act out of love. Do to others. If you see that there's a person who's in need and you know that they could use help, you're supposed to help them. Okay, so this is a very different thing. And so I know that a lot of people will say, oh, all religions are basically alike. They have this same rule. No, they don't. First of all, I've shown you how different this rule is, but also that is simply an ethic. And with Christ, it's supposed to be the core of how we live our lives. For other people, well, it's enough simply not to do anything harmful. But Christ expects us to act like him, to help others, not to simply refrain from hurting others. And so we're going to take a look at what St. Gregory Palamas said about the Golden Rule. And he actually devoted an entire sermon to it. I'm not going to read you the entire sermon, but only some parts of it. I hope I have the right page again here. I've got to make sure that I'm... Okay, so here we go. So he's saying, first of all, that the evangelist Matthew, when the Lord said these words, said that this is the law and the prophets. This is interesting too, because what he's saying there is that was the purpose of the Jewish law and of all of the instructions of the prophets, to treat other people the way we would want to be treated. That means with love, with consideration, with kindness, with understanding, with mercy. That's what God intended. So the Lord, remember way back at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, the Lord said, do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to what? Fulfill them. And then people say, oh, if the Lord didn't abolish the law, I guess we shouldn't be eating pork, or we should be worshiping on Saturdays. You see how misguided this is? This is the fulfillment of the law. This is bookending that earlier statement in the Sermon on the Mount. So he gave us all of these instructions between that little verse, which was in back in chapter 5, and now we're toward the end of chapter 7. And so this is what the law and the prophets are all about. And we don't get closer to God by avoiding certain foods, or even for us as Orthodox Christians, fasting and things like this. That is a tool. We don't get brownie points in heaven for how strict we are in our fasting if the rest of our life doesn't bear the fruits of that, doesn't show the fruits of that self-discipline, okay? And one of the ways we show discipline is by helping somebody we really don't want to help. Have you ever been in that position before? There's somebody you really don't want to help them because you're annoyed with them or whatever. But when you overcome that and you do to them what you would have them do to you, then you're acting in a Christ-like manner. You're truly imitating Christ. So here's St. Gregory Palamas. He says, he sums up all of his teaching. The law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. This is also in the Gospel of Matthew, the love of God and love of our neighbor, but that's in chapter 22. Notice how he has gathered everything into one and included not only the righteousness found in the law and the prophets, but every good deed done among men. since he is not making laws now for just one race, but for the whole world, or rather for all those who come to him through faith from every nation under heaven. Now, what the Lord has revealed, that all the gospel precepts are inscribed within us. In other words, everything you need to know is this. That's all you need to know. This is all of the law and the prophets. And we know this as Orthodox Christians, but we don't think about it too often. Well, what are we supposed to do with our lives? We're supposed to imitate Christ. Okay? Who did this? He didn't think about himself. He thought about us. He came to earth. He humbled himself and became a human being and suffered all of these things and the abuse of people and the difficulties of human life, all the things he went through, including the cross, but not limited to the cross, to show us how we're supposed to behave. Okay, in a godlike manner, in a loving manner, because God is love. So here's again St. Gregory Palamas. You want to hear from him, not from Dr. Jeannie. So let's go back to Gregory Palamas. He commands and ordains that we should order our lives in accordance with these laws. Being the lover of goodness and friend of man, philanthropos, he has put into our nature the knowledge of how we should act. Look at that. What does that mean? He's put this into our nature. We all know right from wrong. There is no excuse for bad behavior. We can't say, well, I didn't know. Because if you were Jewish, you could say, well, I didn't know those laws. But we all know. How do we all know? Because he has instilled in every human being a conscience. Okay? So that we would have no excuse. He's put this as part of our nature. Why do we have this as part of our nature? Because we are from God. We were creatures made by God in his image and likeness. This is in our nature. Sin is not part of our nature, but love and goodness is. Gregory Palamas. So when someone desires something from you, strive to appear self-consistent. Think it good that he should receive something from you and put it into action. What if, however, he wants from you more than what you have? By means of what you do have, show that if you possessed more, you would give it. Do you want to be loved by everyone and granted pardon? Do you regard being blamed as distressing and hard to bear, especially if you have done very little wrong? Love everyone yourself. Be quick to forgive. Avoid passing judgment, seeing, as it were, yourself in every person, and making this the basis for your verdicts, actions, and attitudes. Wise advice. This is what we've been hearing about when we've heard the instructions to love others as ourselves, to not judge, right? We have to see in others in ourselves in others, rather, okay? And to always give them the benefit of the doubt. This is what now, when we say this, we're not saying to sign up for abuse. He's not saying if somebody beats you, let them beat you. We're not talking about this, so don't take these instructions from the fathers and misuse them. Okay, he's not saying that if somebody harms you, you should simply accept that, and this is the will of God or anything silly like that, okay? I'm trusting on you people to be smart enough to understand what is meant by these spiritual instructions. Here again, Gregory Palamas speaking to, preaching to other monks. For it is a natural impulse in all of us to want to be loved and to be well treated by others as much as ourselves. The will to do good and to be well treated by others, to be well disposed towards all, as we are toward ourselves, is therefore inborn in us. We were all made in the image of him who is good. Then when sin entered and multiplied, it did not extinguish our self-love, since it was not at all opposed to that, but it has cooled down love for one another, the crown of the virtues, and changed it and rendered it useless. As a result, he who renews our nature, recalling it to the grace of his own image and putting his laws, as the prophet tells us, into our hearts, says, as you would that people do to you, so do to them. Now Christ tells us through the gospel, You who are mine will find grace in my presence if you keep my commandments. But if you do nothing more than sinners do, loving those who love you, what good is that to you, who the ones who do the same? You will have no confidence toward me on that account. We heard that earlier. Do you remember? This was also in the Sermon on the Mount. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do the same. We're supposed to love everyone. We're supposed to do good to everyone, even those who harm us. Okay, well, this is so well established, not only in the Gospels, but in the other writings of the New Testament, such as St. Paul. So, as we continue and hear from St. Gregory Palamas, let's close out the program with him. So if here you make yourself like the Son of God through your actions and show yourself kind toward all, as he is kind to everyone, there you will receive likeness to him and more besides. The light of the glory of the Most High will shine around you, and you will be eternally with those in whose company Christ our God will be among, distributing the honors of eternal blessedness. He revealed this by adding, "You shall be children of the highest, for he is kind to the unthankful and to the evil. For this purpose the Son of God bowed the heavens and came to earth, became the Son of Man, spoke and acted as he did, and finally suffered and died for us, rose again, and went up to heaven once more to make us heavenly, immortal sons of God. So the things he now asks of us, that we should love our enemies, do good, and lend to those who are unable to repay, are not only fitting and beneficial for us, as has already been demonstrated, but are in no small comparison with what he gave. He gave himself for us, who not only had nothing to give in return, but who had previously shown ourselves in many ways to be ungrateful and evil. By contrast, he urges us to lend what we have in excess and to do good with what we possess. So there you go. This is St. Gregory Palamas, and here's how he closes this discussion. What do we have, and how much? And for the sake of these trifles, he gives us in exchange likeness to himself, sublime adoption as sons, and heavenly rewards. So there you have it. So when he tells us to do these things that seem too onerous, too difficult, because we don't like this person or that person, and all he's asking us to do is to do to them what we would want done to us. And it's really a very tiny thing that he's asking, considering what he did for us. This is the point that St. Gregory Palamas is making. So here again, we see the sublime wisdom of the Lord Jesus Christ. And I hope this is something for us to think about as we continue in this week. And we will continue, and I expect we will finish the Sermon on the Mount next Monday, okay? So I hope you will join me at that time. And now let's close with our prayer. Lord, now let your servants depart in peace according to your word. For our eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared before the face of all peoples, a light to enlighten the Gentiles, and the glory of your people Israel. Amen. Good night.